Om Gananam Twa Ganapati Gung Havamahe Kavin Kavinam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspata Ana Shunvanu Tabi Siddha Sadhanam Om Shrim Jyotir Ganeshaya Namaha Om Vakratunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kuru Me Deva Sarvakaryesha Sarvada.
Welcome to Ojas Oasis. This is a place where you will learn how to optimize your body, mind, and spirit in ways you have longed for a long time, perhaps your entire life. Our mission is to help you cultivate, nourish, and protect your ojas, your immunity, and inner peace. Hello! We are back for part 3 of our series, Healing Trauma with Freedom Cole. As promised, we're going to explore the world of Vedic astrology. Why is this aspect of treatment so important?
And not only why is it so important, but when we understand what makes it so important and how it works, it's actually the fundamental principle that ties Ayurveda, yoga, and Jyotish together. And that is that there's a core principle of how the human being works, of what we're made of. What is it that composes? Who am I? What is this body that I'm in? and when we start breaking that down, and what we learn was understood thousands of years ago by the Vedic sages. And the Vedic sages, they took time and they questioned. They looked within for the answers, and they said, okay, why am I doing this? Why does this work like this? Why is it when this is hot, this is what happens? And thousands of years of development gave us an understanding of elementals. And whether we, from a scientific view, yes, there's a whole table of elements, but as far as from a phenomenological perspective, things are in a flow state, things are in a gaseous state, things are in a solid state. There's just a certain nature of elementals. And understanding those elementals, understanding how they compose the human body and how the human body works based upon those elementals, how the mind is working based upon its qualities of balance, of excess and deficiency. And so, and there's a whole lot more there, but we'll just stay with just those for simplicity. When we fully define and understand those principles of what makes a human being, and how does this human being work? How are they processing? How do they physically process? How do they mentally process? And this was taught in the Vedic tradition. Ayurveda is built on this understanding of the human being. And yoga, when we are doing the therapeutics in a traditional way, is built on this foundation of understanding the human being. Similarly, Jyotish is the Sanskrit word for Vedic astrology. Jyotish is built on this fundamental principle. In the beginning of Prashahora Shastra, one of the core texts that I use for Jyotish, its first chapter, they go right into this is how the human being was created, and this is what the human being is made of. It's the first chapter. And so this core, when we understand the principles of what makes us who we are and how we are, then we can say, oh, this is becoming too much. And we can make that too much be in balance in 100 different ways. And so 100 different ways, depending on how old they are, depending on what country they live in, depending on what their work style looks like, depending on their belief systems. We can balance those principles with so many different methods. when we get into Western diagnostics, we have something like depression. But is depression being caused by an excess of kapha that's making a person too heavy, or is it an excess of tamas that is creating a dysregulation and disassociation that is making the nervous system down regulate too much? Or is it a medicine that somebody's taking that's, and so we don't treat depression. We are treating the principles underlying what is being experienced as depression. And so there's a key phenomenological meaning, what am I actually experiencing? Like whatever the name of it is, sure, but what is my experience of it? And so we in the Vedic world are looking for that experience, and then based upon the principles of our understanding of the human being, we're addressing that experience and what is creating that experience to come into a place of wellness. So, and in that, it depends, and it's not an accident. It's the depends is based on a deep ancient science that guides the way we work with people.
I found my just now kind of side note is that I'm getting strangely emotional hearing you speak about this, just because I think it's because I'm finding myself so inspired by the amount of care that goes into this approach that is hard to find, honestly. Lots of people suffered from some form of trauma in their lives. And I, in talking with them, whether they come to me for Ayurvedic care or not, perhaps it's a friend, perhaps it's a family member, or perhaps it's just someone who I happen to meet along the path or the journey. But so few people are finding the care that they need, the amount of intentionality behind every single decision that we make, every recommendation that we give is so deeply rooted from a place of care. Like, it's one thing to say you care, but to really study a human being with this amount of intentionality is just so beautiful. And that's inspiring me in my practice. And it makes me grateful to know you, to have met you, to be here in this moment right now talking about this. So that's the in real time, that's the effect that this conversation is having on me. I absolutely love the amount of just, it's not just thought, it's what's we're applying this to real human beings. You know, this isn't just an intellectual conversation. This is really changing people's lives. It's saving people's lives. This knowledge and the application of this knowledge is truly so beautiful. So I just wanted to say that really quick before we move on into the rest of
100%.
this beautiful, amazing knowledge. I know you said you wanted to define the word Vedic
Hmm.
before
And
we
so
move.
and so we tapped into it a little bit by looking at these principles that were originating from these Vedic sages. And when we go into Jyotish, and the Sanskrit word is Jyotish, and some people translate it, it's popularly translated as Vedic astrology. Now, in Sanskrit, you will not find the word Vedic astrology anywhere because it's just that's not the. Sometimes it's been called Indian astrology. Sometimes it's been called Hindu astrology. Now, the reason why they all have their pluses and minuses, and some people say it's Indian, it's not Vedic, or whatever the reason, and they have their reasons. But if we say Indian, then we're only referring to modern day India, which Vedic astrology is. We can see the same astrology in Burma. We can see it all the way over into Thailand, where it slowly changes slightly, but it's the same system. And in the ancient world, this form of astrology went all the way into it was in Pakistan, it was in Afghanistan, and it was mixing with the astrological systems that were in Iran. And so to call it Indian is a very modern, the present division of lines that make India India. Is modern, and even in that, like I'm in a tradition from Odisha, which is the eastern part of India, which is very different than some of the astrologies in South India, very different than some of the North Indian traditions. So if we want to get Indian, we got to almost add where in India, because the different kingdoms of India had different flavors. So if we say Indian, it doesn't show the breadth of the astrology. It doesn't show the specificity of the astrology in its original context. If we use the word Hindu, there's Jains, there's Buddhists, Muslims who've used the Vedic system. So it limits us again, putting it into Hindu. I like Vedic. If we're going to use English, I like Vedic because it utilizes Vedic principles, the understanding of the human being as the Vedic tradition teaches. And so I like Vedic in from that perspective. But to be proper, Jyotish is the right word, and Jyotish means that which is of the lights. And there's a beautiful indication, or comparison of, we're looking at the lights in the sky, we're looking at the sun and the moon, and the system of calculating the calendar and the days, and the sun, the moon moving through the stars. And then there's also the fact that the human being, at the core of their being, is light. And that human being at the core as light, that light is consciousness. So when we say Jyotish, we're talking about the lights outside. We're also talking about the light of consciousness. Yeah.
I love thinking about the word light, also as, well, the remover of darkness, of course, and we can apply that to the focus of the series, which is trauma, because that is quite a dark cloud over many people's realities. So it's removing that. It's also truth, right? Being able, like the tejas aspect of light, to be able to discern what is me and what is not me. And my understanding of Ayurveda and yoga is that when we are in, equilibrium, or when we are in, inhabiting a state of sama, that is our true nature. If we are in a state of imbalance or dis-ease, that is not truly our true nature. Our true nature is light, like you said. And so there's an aspect that it's like what searching for who we truly are, and what the truth is, which could be perhaps the highest
And
pursuit.
just to touch on that,
Mhm.
words, when we're in sama, we have the potential to be who we are. It's not that just being in balance, we are who we are. We have the potential to really be present with who we are and what we are. It's not a guarantee in and of itself,
Mm.
but it's not
That's a good
possible to
point.
be who we are if we are not in sama. We're in someone
Mhm.
else's story. We're in some past experience, if we're not in sama.
The aspect of the Vedic system that I find really attractive, one of the many aspects, is that we are teaching people how to regulate themselves. We're not just, it's not like you're only like when you're with me and you're in a session with me or with Freedom, or one of the practitioners, it's not just about having that hour of being regulated. It's we're sending you home with real tools, with real practices that you can maintain this for the rest of your life. And
empower you to feel like you have a say in how the rest of your life is going to go, even though you experienced a time of, helplessness. Your an aspect of your self was compromised. Now it's a time of re-empowering and taking that power back, which is what knowledge really is. It's like the most empowering thing you can really invest in, is to just understand and learn. So on that note, let's get into your history with Jyotish and your background
Just a note on that. You mentioned
Yeah.
we empower them to heal themselves, and helplessness, that place where I can't do it, that is a result of trauma. Trauma breaks a certain self power place because one's power has been taken away, and being able to give somebody the power back to be like, hey, here's a tool, you can heal yourself. That itself is trauma. That is healing trauma in and of itself. So our core paradigm of empowering people is one of the fundamental, if we make them feel like they need us, we've failed. If we give them what they need so they feel they can heal themselves, we've been successful.
Yeah. So I was wondering about your background with Jyotish, and just your history with learning it, practicing it, what perhaps, which lineage you follow, any specifics about how you understand Jyotish or practice it.
So, I started with yoga, and then in learning yoga, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't know yoga without learning Ayurveda. So I went to school for Ayurveda. And while I was in school for Ayurveda, there was a module that showed medical astrology. And I had a friend that had been like, look at this stuff. And I was, yeah. And I wasn't paying. And when I saw medical astrology, I was like, oh my gosh, let's talk about that Jyotish you've been talking about. And it caught me. It's like I was a forest in drought that caught on fire. I read everything that was available in English, and went to India, was looking for teachers, met a handful that I was not happy with. And then finally I met my teacher, and it took a year or so to fully be like, this is my teacher. Just because at the time that I met him, he had just begun publicly teaching, and he was teaching how to say, there's certain things in the texts that nobody knows what they mean. And he all of a sudden showed up and was talking about those things as if like everybody knew about them. And people were like, this guy's crazy. What's he talking about? And someone else is like, no, look, he's right here referring. And so there was this, and this is in India. This is in India. There was this, who is this person teaching these things and various. And so I stepped in and met him in this time period that he was beginning to publicly teach. And he came from a lineage that goes back hundreds of years, that like literally the family talks about in 800 AD, they moved from the Somanath temple to this location, and then the whole history of the tradition. And finally there was the most respected astrologer in America, a person named Chakrapani. And my teacher gave a lecture, and he wrote, it was maybe a 30-page thing to present. He got maybe through 6 or 7 pages at the conference because the crowd wasn't, he didn't understand what the level of modern astrology was to be able to, at that time period, be teaching at the right level. And so just 6 pages through this presentation that he had intended, the Chakrapani, after his lecture, came over and touched his feet. And I was like, an 80-year-old man who's considered the top astrologer in America just touched his feet. Who am I at this stage of my practice to be doubting? And so I began studying in that tradition. And I was lucky enough to be present before his full popularity started. So I spent hours and hours with just a few core students. And he, at that time, he was changing. He had been working in the government, and he went home to his place of the family, and I was traveling with him. And so I went and I lived there for a while, and I got to actually experience the family tradition in its location, the spirituality that goes with it, and then the ancillary teachers of the lineage. And after however many I've been, that was 2000 that I started studying. So I'm at I started studying Jyotish in 98, met my teacher, Pandit Sanjay Roth, in 2000, and have been with him since. And I'm considered a guru in the tradition, and which gives me a certain level of authority in what I do, and also makes it so that I don't say things off the cuff. I don't say things without considering what I'm saying, who's listening, how it's landing, really working to ensure that I'm upholding the tradition in a way that is authentic to the tradition, while also modernizing is a part of the tradition. How we take what was used in Orissa and bring it into how we're going to use it in California, in the USA, in Europe, is a part of the tradition. A tradition that's hundreds of years old, has been updated and modified, but there's core principles that you're modifying according to. And so understanding how to stay true to the core principles, true to the tradition, and put something in its modern proper context is been quite the path. I think that's and I have classes that I teach, and I'm not taking new clients. I got a 1.5 year waiting list. And at that point, it's just I'm working off of that, and occasionally there's the stage 4 cancer treatment that I'll throw in there just to they can't wait. So yeah, that's I think the history there.
How,
or at least one insight into some of that history. My history with the astrology.
You've evolved your practice, I would say, to have a really strong focus on mental health. So how did that come about?
On a certain level, it always was the area of interest. My bachelor's is in psychology, and when I was in school, I was debating, do I do my master's or do I go to India for this internship? Because I had just done while I was working on my bachelor's, I also got this year-long program in Ayurveda, and the internship was in India. I was like, do I do this or do I do a master's? And there was a handful of things that pushed me in that way, but the biggest was that my professors in the psych world all had issues, mental health issues, personality issues, all kinds of stuff. When I was studying Ayurveda, I was with people that their eyes were light, they smiled, there was kindness. It was, and so I was like, I'm going to India, and I always had this desire to understand the mental realm and the mental health element. And when I met my teacher, that still was my intention, but I went deep in the tradition in and of itself. And it was in 2016, 17, I went back to school. I got my master's in psychology, and I started a PhD. I still have to do a dissertation in order for that to be finished. But COVID hit and things got a little too busy. But what I got from that schooling was an understanding of how the Western system works, the terminology of the Western system, and being fully trained and holding this lineage of astrology. While I'm learning the Western model, I wasn't somebody who was holding a Western model, learning an Indian tradition. I was somebody who's in an Indian tradition, learning the terminology and the perception of the Western astrology world, Western psychology world. So that took me to a whole other level. And as you know, the world always brings to us exactly what we're studying and what we need to know. And so as soon as I got to the end of the master's, all of a sudden my practice, I'd say 20% were psychologists that I was working with. I'm doing the yoga therapy, the Jyotish, the Ayurveda, and they're psychologists, and I knew the lingo. It was just the way to work, and I started lecturing a little bit more on mental health, which brought a larger mental health client base, and yeah, so it was my desire for mental health was there from the beginning. And sometimes we have to do a decade of learning to be able to fully step in to achieving that realm that we want to be working on. Luckily for my students, they have me who spent 20 something years learning all that can give them that can teach in a certain way that saves them years of searching and this and that and asking questions. And Indian education is much slower than Western education in its approach of teaching. So learning in a traditional format, it took a long time. But mental health is the realm that I'm most focused on, and it's funny that when one of the first few meetings I had with my guru, he looked at my chart, and there's a technique where we see like what is the topic that a person is going to, what is the topic that a person is going to be able to bring new knowledge to, that is going to be able to really research and share and study on a deeper way, and just what's your power topic, we could call it, right? Like a power topic. And he looked and he said you should focus on nakshatras. And nakshatras are it's another way to say, it's like a Vedic way to say the mental perception, the mental health, the mental realm. And that was one of his first statements, was this is what you should focus on. And I didn't really get the connection until later. I was like, oh my gosh, he did say this is what I should be focusing on, like in the very beginning. And it's what I've put the large emphasis of my time into learning, working with, and hopefully with the goal that when I leave body, that I've formulated all of this knowledge in a way that allows people to be extremely productive with the mental health of others. Productive in all ways, kind to them, not traumatizing them more, but really uplifting trauma, uplifting depression, anxiety, all these and all kinds of other, anxiety and depression, there are primary Western diseases, but in Ayurveda, envy, jealousy, hatred, these are considered mental illnesses as well.
So, would you
Yeah.
say that when you get a new, even though you no longer take new clients, you said you're pretty booked. I mean, unless it's really an urgent,
Yeah.
urgent care situations.
Uh, there's no public taking of clients at this
Mhm.
public taking of clients. Yeah.
Would you say that the first thing that you look at when working with someone is their nakshatra? Is that like your starting point?
Yeah, so we spend about a year in my level 1 course talking about what's the first thing to look at. It takes about a year to fully grasp. Um, our first thing, I have a integration that I teach, where the first thing to look at is, who is this person? Not just what is this a chart in front of me showing. What are some what's their sun sign or something of that nature, but who is this human being? And my goal when I teach my level 1 is, at the end of the year, a person can look at a chart and know who that person is, like know them as well as their best friends would know them. And we do that first with understanding the rising sign and where the planet ruling that rising sign is placed, and the strength of those factors. And that shows, what is it that a person is up to? What are they focusing on in life? Is this a person who their home life is what matters? Is this a person who what they learn and their knowledge base is what matters to them? Is it a person who's career driven? And if they are career driven, is the career being driven by a desire to be seen as somebody powerful? Or is their career being driven by, I want to make the world a better place? Or is their career being driven by, I want to make sure that this world is getting educated? So in that way, we're like, what is it that a person is doing in the world, and why are they doing that? Then we go over to the moon, and in evaluating the moon, we're looking at its house, which is the topic, and the nakshatra, which is the glasses that a person is wearing. So we're looking at what is the world to this person. Do they see the world as a scary place that they need to protect themselves from? Or do they see the world as full of opportunity? Or do they see the world as, and so in this way, getting how are they seeing the world, and in what context? Do they see the world through relationships? So are they optimistic? They see the world through relationships in an optimistic way? Or do they see the world through, I need to purify myself, in a negative way? Or that could also be in a positive way. So really getting, how are they seeing, what is their view of the world? And then when we combine what are they up to and how are they viewing the world, we start to get, why is this person doing everything they're doing? Why did they take on this kind of career? Why? And then we see how their life lands for them in a deeper way. So first thing I do is, who is this? And I make sure I know who I'm talking to.
I find that really refreshing, because people with trauma, I feel like there's so much stigma. We've in the most recent years, culturally, I think we've made huge strides toward breaking stigma with talking, like, bringing things out of, under the rug. A lot of things that were brushed under the rug for many, many generations. We're finally kind of beginning to digest it as a cultural conversation, which is a huge part of why you and I are dedicating a whole series to the topic of trauma, because that is part of what helps us heal, is to digest it together, break it down, look at it from all these different angles. But the fact alone that you see a person first, outside of what has happened to them, seeing who they are first, not defining them as,
100%.
not assigning their trauma or their symptoms as who they are. Like, breaking that identification is really, really, I think, to me, it's everything. It's so Yeah.
it's healing in and of itself. To be seen, what you're up to and what you're trying to do in this world, it's healing in and of itself. You're not just a depressed person, or you're not just somebody with anxiety attacks. You're this person who cares about your home, and you get anxious about, like, is everybody okay? But you want to make them, you want to make sure that everybody's doing well and getting what they need, or whatever it is that's there. We know, we see them, and then we can go into where how trauma has impacted them, and and let's see if we can tie all our realms together here with when we start looking at trauma, because on a certain level, trauma forces us, if we're going to treat it properly, it forces us to have to tie all of these realms of Ayurveda, yoga, and Jyotish together. Our original definition was this overwhelming experience that can't be processed. And so that overwhelming experience that can't be processed, it dysregulates the pranas. And dysregulating the pranas, the digestion isn't working right, and there's becomes a physiological malfunction. From the yogic perspective, when that overwhelm happens, we lose our sama, and we will either go into hyperactive rajas or hypoactive tamas. The nervous system will either overly downregulate or overly upregulate. When we move over into the Jyotish realm, we enter something more in the sphere of resiliency. And what I mean by resiliency is the one of the big words, the explanations that they use in the trauma world, the trauma education world, is there's a platoon of soldiers, and they're in war. Something happens, incredibly traumatic experience. They come back. Of 10 gentlemen, or 10 people, 3 of them are having intense psychological trauma. The others are doing okay. So something in those few that are having this trauma reaction is different than those who had the same, having being with a friend who's murdered, and or something really drastic happens with an explosive. It's just what that does to the nervous system. Some people have the ability to digest that overwhelming experience. Their physiological and psychological agni is strong enough, and they overcome. And others do not have that ability to overcome. And that ability is generally, if I speak from a Western perspective, the attachment style had some issue when they were growing up. Their sense of self might have something disturbed. There's something that's out of place that made it so that trauma could not be digested. When we go into the Jyotish realm, we look at sattva is sama, is this balanced place. And we have the factors of sattva in the chart. And there's where yoga just says, here's sattva, here's how we balance it. Ayurveda just refers to it. We're not really treating. We might say, oh, eat better like this or like that, get up early, but we're not getting as specific on the root of why was there a lack of sattva. When we're in the Jyotish world, we have to zero in with trauma on why was there a loss of sattva? Why is it that we're not able to return to a regulated place? And our 3 factors of sattva in the Jyotish world are the sun, the moon, and Jupiter. They're what give us sattva. They're the pillars of sattva. And when we understand their indications, we understand what are the 3 pillars of sattva. And so the first being the sun is our identity, our sense of self. And when we have a healthy sense of self, then we pull ourselves back into sattva. And I spend a few hours when I teach this concept to yoga therapists and astrologers. What is the sense of self from the Vedic perspective? We're not going there, but just understanding that our identity and the strength and nature of that, it creates sattva or not. And we talked a little bit in the beginning about, an Ayurvedic practitioner gives the client the tools that empowers them. By empowering them, they say, I can do it. I'm able. We're changing their sense of self. And that changing this by them understanding that they have the ability to heal themselves, we've actually strengthened the sattva of the sun so that they have this greater ability to heal. Now, somebody might have just a sun that's just fine. So empowering them to heal themselves might not be enough. And for someone else, that might be the missing ingredient that does everything. The moon translates best in Western psychology into the attachment, the attachment style of the individual, which means to not spend too much time on it, but is it easy for somebody to emotionally connect? Or if things get emotionally intense, do they close down? Or if things get emotionally intense, do they get reactive? Like, what is this level? And Charaka Samhita actually talks about this and defines this extremely clearly, these 3 methodologies of how we emotionally relate. And so we can see this style based upon the moon. And then we have Jupiter. And Jupiter is, so we have, how do we emotionally relate? We have our sense of self. And then Jupiter gives us, we could say he's the planet that represents philosophy. But what is philosophy but how we view the world? And so Jupiter shows what is our what is our view that we hold of the world? And that view alters how we interpret things. So one person might be mugged walking down the street in New York and say, oh my gosh, this is terrible. I had such a horrible situation. My life sucks. And someone else might be mugged and be like, oh my gosh, thank God they didn't kill me. I'm so lucky I got, like, all they took was my credit cards that I can cancel and get a new wallet soon. Same event, 2 drastically different ways to interpret. And with trauma, there is sometimes terrible experiences that happen to people. When you start working with trauma, it is such a heavy place because there are drastic, just things that humans shouldn't do to humans that happen. And how do we make sense of that? Why did dad abuse in this way? Or why did uncle or why did mom say these terrible things? Like, being able to find a way to be like, oh, to make sense of why, and to make sense to that in how do we interpret that is Jupiter. So sattva, according to Jyotish, is sustained by how we interpret the world, how we view ourselves, and how we are emotionally relating. And Jyotish gives us various methodologies to work with these. Now, with when I teach yoga therapy for mental health, we have the ability to diagnose which of those areas are deficient, even without a chart. We can sit there and question and in an intake kind of figure out, okay, this is where I see there being an issue. And we can go into some yoga therapeutics that are going to strengthen this realm of being. With the Jyotish chart, we know instantly. We can see just by, okay, this is a situation that this is where the person has some difficulty, and this is where we're going to work. And when we get to a certain level of understanding, we can also make sure that they're seeing the right kind of psychologists, which if I hadn't gone back to school to get all this education, I wouldn't have understood the types of therapists to be able to be like, oh, those guys, they're working on the moon. And the reason they're so good at curing those kind of clients is because they're working on this element of consciousness. This other group, they're really good at curing this kind of when this element of sattva becomes deficient. So we can even ensure that our clients are going to the right types of therapists to be supporting them, as well as giving them the different Jyotish and yoga therapy remedies to be coming into balance there. Yeah. Maybe I'll stop for any questions, because I can keep going.
I'm loving it. I say this a lot. I'm kind of curious about your interpretation of this saying. The Jyotish aspect of the Vedic system are the eyes of the rest of the system. I feel like it's the eyes of the Vedas because it's seeing from such a macrocosmic perspective. Everything has you've zoomed out so far back that you see the bigger picture of what you're looking at. So whether that be the trauma itself or the way that the person has internalized it, you're seeing it really from such a deep level, like a soul level. You're seeing the soul, the mind, you're differentiating, okay, the physical body. You can see it all on a map, and it's like the blueprint of how you're going to go about every single other aspect of the treatment.
That statement is an extremely traditional statement that we see in multiple scriptures. And in the Vedic paradigm, there's different branches called Vedanga of the of the Vedas. And Vedanga means this limb of the Vedas that helps me understand Vedic knowledge. Learning Sanskrit is a limb. Learning how to chant is a limb. Learning the meaning of words is a limb. And each of these different limbs is associated with a different sense, a different activity of the body, in a way to kind of turn the Vedas into an actual anthropomorphic being, and the Vedic sciences into an anthropomorphic being. And Jyotish was the eye, was given connection to the eye. And there's so we could do an hour on this, but the eyes are connected to the sun and the moon, and Jyotish is the lights, which is the sun and the moon and the stars. Jyotish is the eyes in Sanskrit literature and such. The eyes are what lead you. If I'm blind, I would need somebody, and I'm walking through woods that I've never been in, I would need somebody to be leading me who has eyes. Otherwise, I couldn't just walk through a place that I've never been before without eyes. So the eyes are what are giving us that seeing nature. And so they are leading what we're doing. And if we go to in the most classical possible root of that, which mantra should I chant when? So Jyotish gives us the calendar. And so today is the day of the winter solstice. And so on the winter solstice, what do we chant on this day? And so in Vedic rituals, it was about what do we do when? And so it was leading us. It was seeing us to where we need to go. And when we start taking Jyotish into the human application realm, then it's where should I go with my life? What is the goal of my life? It's seeing, it's leading us in a healthy, beneficial direction. And so in this way, it is the eyes of the Vedas. It is because we have all this Vedic knowledge. We have this, it depends. It depends. So it depends on what, and so what is leading us to understand these factors. Yeah. So this is why it's called the eyes. It's simplified.
Oh, I'm
That was
sure.
my
I
simple
know, like,
answer. Yeah.
that's a big, big, big topic. So I'm wondering how we tie the three together: Jyotish, Ayurveda, yoga.
Yeah. So it depends. It depends, and that's one that really, um, the order of use fully 110% depends, and one of the biggest factors is what they're coming for. Will shift where preference is put. And these days, because I am so busy with my practice, I will often work alongside different people who are. I even work with clients who have their own Vedic astrologer that whatever they're doing, it's not working. And so we go into it and I send them back to their astrologer to keep working with it. Or someone might have a certain condition, and I'll do the initial intake, and if they need to see somebody weekly, I'm too busy for that. So I will set up a program and work alongside of someone else that I work with relative to the condition that they have. Um, how do they all tie together? Um, there's they're called sister sciences, and you were very gentle in how you used Eye of the Vedas. Eye of the Vedas is very classical reference. Calling these sisters is a little more. I haven't seen an actual verse that calls them sisters. It's a little bit more of a colloquialism. Um, in the ancient world, they didn't separate them to need to call them sisters in the same kind of way. It was a different. There was an understanding that all the sciences are supporting each other. It's one gem with different facets, and we are working on those facets. As far as a student, I think it's important to know a little of all of these. Now, we have to, unless you're somebody who this is it, this is all you're going to do is study this. And if you want to go skiing and go to the Bahamas and that kind of stuff, just pick one area and have familiarity with all the others. If you're wanting to take on two of these areas, you're gonna have to let go of certain things that other people have in their life that in American Western culture are considered normal. When I look at some of my teachers in India, in the older generations, this is all they did. They didn't go skiing. They went to they went to the temple where on the corner they were discussing a certain text. Then they went to the other place, and this was their life. If somebody wanted to take on all three, it's literally a pure life devotion to the study of these. Otherwise, taking one, whether it's the Ayurveda, the yoga, or the Jyotish, and then, like, for me, I in the school that my Science of Light school, we have a 6-week course, learn about my chart, and we have a 12-week course that kind of gives some fundamentals. At least having something like that under one's belt so that they know, okay, this is what you can see in this realm. This is how it works. That way, when you're doing your Ayurveda, oh, this is something that I think they're going to need the chart for. And by actually knowing a little bit, it also gives you a bit more discrimination in who is a practitioner that I want to recommend to somebody to. If you don't know Ayurveda, anybody looks good. Once you've studied for a decade, then you get really picky on who you're going to refer to and who you won't. So having some knowledge at least lets you have a better referral skill set, so that when you do refer somebody, you're referring them to somebody quality that's actually going to be a support for them.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of, if you're going to travel, depends on how long you're going to stay in other countries, but if there's a different dominant language, you're going to want to know some basic words to get you through other places in the world. You know, like hello, goodbye, thank you, please, where's the bathroom, how do I get to the train? You know, so learning the language, at least like the fundamentals, the basics, if you're gonna do this for the long haul, if this is your path. Is trauma a condition, an illness, or are there just symptoms of trauma? Because I struggle to call it a condition, just because I feel like it's the aftermath that really makes it a disease. Like, it's not the actual event.
It depends how the word is being used in context. Trauma in and of itself is not a disease. There's a traumatizing event, and how that impacts the individual will depend on all the factors of how they're made. So a traumatic experience is going to impact the pitta very different than it impacts a vata. And for two vatas that have been in a trauma situation, how they were raised, one that was raised in a very abusive family and one that was raised in a very loving family, are going to, again, have their symptomology show up in a different way. And so our goal is to be able to understand those factors and to be able to support them with the realm that they're needing. But for us, we're the Vedic world is phenomenological, meaning what is actually showing up? How is it showing up for them?
We have to make sure we really understand this from every angle that we possibly can. And with that, I want to say thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you for the compliment, and thank you for having me on.
Thank you for listening to Ojas Oasis with Sasha Bershadsky. To learn more about Ayurvedic healing, please visit ojasoasis.com. We'll see you next time, and until then, have your smile.